Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Unfiltered on SABC 3 and SABC News Channel 404. My name is Ridi Tlhabi. Now, South Africa's media is under scrutiny, and rightly so. Confirmations that the country's leading newspaper, the Sunday Times, repeatedly published lies in a political game whose consequences have brought state institutions like the Hawks, like SARS, and the police to their knees. The weakening of institutions is not the only casualty. And as far as I'm concerned, this part is the most important one. Lives have been decimated in ways we are yet to fathom. Whilst the Sunday Times is facing the public humiliation of being a peddler of lies in several stories, the time is ripe for us to ask pertinent questions about the role of media in society. So tonight on Unfiltered, we ask you, whose media is it anyway?
If it's fake, it's not news.
In South Africa and across the world, we've seen situations where journalists and whistleblowers have come together to make these massive exposures of dirty secrets that the public needs to know about.
We are realizing, or for those that hadn't realized it, the power of the media, that we are holding a very powerful position, and that powerful position has to come with responsibility. We continue to talk about the fact that we need ethical journalism.
SABC belongs to the people. It is the public broadcaster. It is not the state broadcaster. This is a channel, this is a medium, this is a platform through which stories of South Africans need to be told.
Let's welcome to our studio our guest, Niran Tulsi, who is the Ruth First Fellow and contributing editor at New Frame. We also have Macintosh Polela. He's an author, former Hawks spokesperson, and was a journalist himself. And let me remind you that tonight we are asking the question, whose media is it anyway? Share your views on the SABC News Online Twitter handle, Facebook pages using the hashtag SABC News Unfiltered. Okay. I want to start with you, Niran. I've read every single article today that analyzes the state of the media. And it's been very interesting to me that some people have been quite generous. They say that the Sunday Times and other media have made errors or mistakes. Come on, who are we fooling here? There's a mistake, and there is willfully misleading people and not verifying your facts. Which do you think happened in this case?
I can't speak for the Sunday Times investigative unit, and I wouldn't.
How do you read it as a South African and a social justice activist?
Well, my job as a journalist is to deal with facts, not with speculation. But
you're analysing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd like to analyse more importantly, I think, the state of South African media right now. And I think there are structural issues which we haven't dealt with, which go back decades, and those still insinuate themselves in contemporary South African journalism, whether it is collusion with power, whether they be state power, they be the interests of people working within shadow states, or even the power of capital, and also, I suppose, an arrogance and a hubris that comes with kind of the job that we do sometimes.
And that's exactly why I asked you the question, because you gave the annual Ruth First Memorial Lecture, and you used the term colluding with power. And you're saying that the news actually spreads because it rides on our collective indignation. You know that once you've said something, there will be this collective uproar, and whoever is the power behind all of it would have achieved their objective.
Yeah, well, I think my argument is that in this technological digital age where we have social media, which really is designed towards optimizing or using our indignation and our outrage to create these cascades and echo chambers, that it's much easier to work on our emotion, whether they be our vulnerabilities or they be our insecurities, or even our sense of kind of outrage and lack of ability or sense that we're powerless. And the only way we can actually suggest some kind of power is to get on the Twitter and the Facebook, right?
That's a whole topic on its own. I want to talk about social justice in just a moment, because it takes us to the question about what the media should be doing in a democracy such as yours. But Macintosh, you've been a journalist before.
Sure.
It was so very easy to read some stories with sympathy and say that the journalists perhaps were used or manipulated. But I'm afraid that is not the entire story, because you wrote a column in the Mail and Guardian where you share your experiences as a Hawk spokesperson. So we're sitting here having read lies, but knowing that people such as yourselves reached out to journalists and tried to tell them the truth. Take us through that journey very quickly.
Well, I'll take you through the story of rendition, which came to us on a very early on a Saturday morning, where I was called by Anwar Dramat, my boss back then, and said the Sunday Times had made these allegations. And indeed, we sat for hours and hours interrogating the people that were alleged to have personally rendered people to Zimbabwean authorities. And you must remember that Anwar Dramat and General Sibiya, as well as Cowboy, were effectively being accused of taking people to Zimbabwe to be killed. And so these were very, very serious allegations. And we took them so seriously that we gathered the management of the Hawks to make sure that we get to the bottom of the truth. And once we satisfied ourselves about what was happening, because it was very clear to us that this was a retaliation from our investigation into General Mdluli, I then wrote very many details to the Sunday Times, more than the questions that they were asked, and I warned them that they were being used in a retaliation because of the investigations that we're doing. It's still not clear, and I cannot understand why they did not divert from the narrative that was formed by crime intelligence. I cannot.
I take it you don't buy this story that certain editorial decisions were made based on information that was available at that time. Your sense is that there was more information available coming from your side, and this was not even considered at all. Is that what you're saying?
Remember that I'm a former journalist, and I know that there are systems and processes where the information is tested for facts, and you can easily, in some cases, then chuck away all the information that is not facts. But I think it was more than that with the Sunday Times. We reached out, and even after I saw the screaming front page headline, I reached out to, I remember, Rob Rose, and I said, guys, you are being used. I gave you this information, and I urge you to correct this. And I was treated with a lot of arrogance, and I was effectively dismissed.
So then, Niren, come in here, talking about the media colluding with power. We're supposed to speak for the voiceless.
Sure.
We are supposed to represent the people who do not have everyday access to the newsmakers. In your mind, why do we drop the ball?
Why do we drop the ball? I think that, for me at this point, I think there are two reasons. One is that I think there hasn't been actual, sincere, profound transformation within media outlets. And it goes back to the roles media have played during apartheid, whether actively propping up the apartheid state in terms of the Afrikaner press, or kind of colluding to protect the interests of capital, which is kind of the English press, which is owned by big mining companies, right? So you have like the alternative press, you have the black press, you have the radical press, which are small pockets, as you have today. I think there's small pockets of really amazing journalism being done today, but back then. And so, but the thing is, we haven't really admitted to and atoned for our roles in apartheid. And I think what has happened now is that there's a structural manifestation of that. I mean, racism or sexism or an anti-poor bias that we see in the South African media doesn't come from individual acts. They come from kind of institutions and structures and things in place for a very long time. And we need to interrogate those deeply to try and understand why we are making the mistakes that we make now. So.
We'll carry on with our conversation in just a moment. We're taking a break. We'll continue to talk about the media, to put a mirror, hopefully, to our faces and talk about what we are doing wrong. Whose media is it anyway? How should South African media serve the society? Stay with us.
We are in the fourth industrial revolution.
Things aren't the same anymore.
Technology is taking over much of what we do. That includes how we make payments.
Blockchain is the future.
On Network, we have robots, hackathons, and tech entrepreneurs.
Making sure that your business is well known across all borders. We use social media.
That's Network with me, Spumele Zondi, on Saturdays at 20:30 and Sundays at 17:30.
her subtle smile, advices. She's taught most of us everything. How to dress, how to address, how to be a woman, what to avoid, what not to eat.
Welcome back to Unfiltered with me, Ridi Tlhabi. If you've just joined us, know that we are coming to you live from SABC in Auckland Park. We continue with our guests. Let me remind you who they are. Niran Tulsi, who is the Ruth First Fellow and contributing editor at New Frame, as well as Macintosh Polela, an author, former Hoax spokesperson. Tonight on Unfiltered, we're asking the question, whose media is it? Anyway, share your views on the SABC News Online Twitter account, Facebook pages using the hashtag SABC News Unfiltered. Okay, so Macintosh, you talked about being a journalist and knowing that there are checks and balances. I must say publicly that I've never been approached to drop a story by an editor, been asked to put a certain people on air in preference over another. I've never been offered money. I've never allowed myself to be manipulated. In fact, the people who've approached me are reputation managers who want to talk with you privately and give you a minister's point of view. And I've always said, if the minister wants to talk, they must come on TV, they must come on radio. So the checks and balances. Many say that it costs money to train and invest and write authentic content, and that fake news, which is a totally a different phenomenon in a sense,
sure,
is cheap. It's so much easy to just send it out there, click bait, and then it is trending, and that is news. That's a society in which we find ourselves, and I must say it's dispiriting. What are your thoughts on that?
It's dispiriting, yeah, of course it is.
So how do we respond as the media? I talked about investment in training journalists and so on. Yeah.
Look, I mean, I think we have a problem in contemporary South African media where we're, especially media owners, and I think we're living in the age of like toxic ownership in South Africa, whether it is independent newspapers or Tiso Black Star.
Did you say Death Star? How ominous.
Tiso Black Star. You know, I mean, under the guise of, because I think media globally and in South Africa, we're panicking around how do we pay for good journalism? How do we ensure money keeps coming in? Because in this digital moment, you know, it's hard to figure out how to keep money coming in. And we're using that as an excuse to shed jobs in newsrooms, to like shirk on our responsibility to train journalists when the money in some instances is there. And I think that media ownership needs to kind of look at itself and do some introspection as much as management and editors and journalists need to. Yeah.
So you've been on both sides,
yes,
Macintosh. You know, in as much as I feel this is an opportune time for us to challenge the media, to question ourselves, I feel like there needs to be a warning to the public as well, to not allow itself to be manipulated once again, because the people who are celebrating the scrutiny and the humiliation of the Sunday Times and other media houses, I feel some of them are not driven by a desire for the truth, by a rejection of lies. They are doing so because their wrongdoing has been exposed. So a politician who's been to jail for fraud and corruption, celebrating the fact that this media house has lied, it doesn't mean they lied about you, but they lied about a particular story, which is equally serious. But the point that I'm making here is that we also need to be discerning when we assess politicians' outcry over the media, the calls for statutory regulations. They're not driven by keeping checks and balances on the media. They're driven by being, by self-preservation. Your thoughts on that?
If you look at my Twitter page, you will see that the people that we're celebrating the most, when I gave tidbits of information where some of the politicians who've never even engaged me on Twitter, and they were saying that you need to out these 3 journalists that were paid, they were celebrating because, not because they were genuinely wishing that, you know, these people should be outed for journalism to be cleansed, but because they have their own ulterior motives.
It's a tit for tat. You've exposed us, we want to expose you.
Of course, and one of them was actually exposed by the media and got into a lot of trouble, ended up leaving politics because of the media. Those are the kind of people that are celebrating, and we shouldn't give them the opportunity to celebrate and then bring in this thing about regulating the media. We need to watch who is celebrating, but also who is saying what after this has happened. But the public, in consuming information, I always say, I read a lot. Not because my background is journalism, but because of the hunger for information. I think we need to teach our people to read multiple sources. By reading multiple sources, you will then gauge and analyze what the facts are.
You know, the detachment that you talk about in your Ruth First lecture, the disconnect that happens between the media and the people about whom they report, that is very disturbing. The scenario that you've just painted as there's a tit for tat between newsmakers, political and economic, and journalists. There are people who get erased from the story. And those are the people that I hope are watching us this evening. Media rooted in social justice. How do we do that?
How do we do that? I suppose we need to, I mean, all journalists have subjectivities, right? We all have our own class biases, our own experiences of race, society, economics, whatever. And I think one of the challenges of journalism is to try and introspect and shed those biases and humble yourself before the people that you are speaking to, who've allowed themselves into your lives and are telling them your stories. And as much as that, to kind of, I suppose, judge and humble yourself before your sources to the point where you are able to make as informed a decision as possible. I mean, that's difficult.
Is it relevant to mention, well, I suppose I'm about to mention it, that not everybody fell for the rogue unit story and the rendition story. I think that's a positive for the industry, that there are many more who were circumspect, who said, what on earth is going on here? But I don't want to amplify that too much because it becomes the whataboutism of politics. But it also means that we're not delving into the conversation about social justice and who we report on. You use such a jarring example of how the Knysna fires, there was a white family that perished in that fire. We knew their names. We knew that she was 8 months pregnant. It was their son's birthday. We knew their neighbors' dogs and their names. And yet every single week, actually, and I'm not exaggerating, in South Africa, there are Shek fires. Look at Khayelitsha today. Children dying. We don't know their names. We don't know their age. So I'm simply saying to the media, don't, congratulate yourself for not falling for the lies. Use the opportunity to reflect on who you're covering and how you're covering, because that's also your responsibility.
Sure. I mean, and it's not only if you're black, poor, and female that you shall remain nameless. I mean, also I think we're failing when we don't report on those kind of stories to actually understand the broader political significance of those stories. For example, the politics that goes into whether a shack settlement is electrified or not. Whether people have in-situ upgrades or not. I mean, there's so much more to the South African story that exists around a simple shack fire that we don't get to. But we do get to the names of the dogs, of the neighbours' families, if you're white.
Is it because the journalists identify with that kind of lifestyle? It's closer to their consciousness?
Well, that's exactly it. I think we need to understand our class and our race biases, try and shed them, and then move between the worlds that journalism allows us to do. It's not very many professions where you can be in a shack settlement in the morning and you can be in the president's official residence in the afternoon. We have that access.
And are we using that properly? Use it responsibly, absolutely. We're taking a quick break. We'll be back in a moment.
We are losing the best of kids. People that are fathers or pastors that comes from a church.
No taxi, nothing. We were not notified. I get to town, there's nothing.
Did you know that the Nile River is actually 6,695 kilometers long? With such a length, the Nile is speculated to be the longest river in the world. It winds from Uganda to Ethiopia, flowing through a total of 9 countries. While the Nile River is often associated with Egypt, it actually touches Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Sudan, as well as Egypt. One of the most well-known facts is the Nile River's ability to produce extremely fertile soil, which made it easy for cities and civilizations to spring up along its banks.
Welcome back. The last segment of Unfiltered with me, Ridi Klabi. If you've just joined us, where have you been? We are coming to you live from SABC in Auckland Park. We continue with our guests, Niran Tulsi, who's the Ruth First Fellow and contributing editor at New Frame, and Macintosh Polela, author and former Hawks spokesperson. Tonight on Unfiltered, we are asking the question, whose media is it anyway? Remember to share your views very quickly with us on SABC News Online, Twitter handle, Facebook pages using the hashtag SABC News Unfiltered. Now, Macintosh, talk to us about the human cost. Talk to us about what happened in the hearts of so many of you who were pushed out because of political gains, those generals with whom you worked, who became your friends. Where are they now after the false accusations?
Well, look, in some cases, like General Sibiya, we know that he now works for the Johannesburg municipality. But before that, like many of us, he was blacklisted and he didn't have a job, and all he had to contend with was paying senior counsel because he was accused of murder. He had to pay lawyers because he was going through a disciplinary hearing that led to his dismissal. Anwar Dramat, he didn't have a job. He still doesn't have a job, by the way. Luckily, after paying senior counsel for a long time, he was lucky that the SAP has decided to pay. But there's a third general who was investigating the corruption at the Mbombela Stadium. His case has dragged on, and it's still not finalized. And the only way he can survive is by borrowing money from friends and from neighbors. And it's a very, very, very sad situation. I meet some of these people. I mean, I met one of the guys where I worked when he was coming for a tender. You can see the physical changes and the physical toll that it has taken on people. We were practically blacklisted. It took me 4 years to find a job.
Because you become unemployable, as it were, because there's this cloud hanging over this stench.
Of course. I mean, you know, I have a master's degree, and think about it. If for me it became that difficult to find a job, what about a person who knows nothing else?
Are you bitter?
No. I'm not bitter. Maybe to be bitter, it's pointless.
But you still have a lot of explosive information about journalists who accepted money. Are you going to tell us who they are right now on Unfiltered?
I won't tell you.
Why not?
Now, because they won't have the opportunity to defend themselves. And, unlike what happened to us, I feel that I have a duty towards them because they need to be put in a platform where they can then defend themselves.
So you are not saying, let's get this right, because I don't want any misunderstandings after tonight. You're not saying you will not reveal. You're saying you would need the appropriate platform in order to do so.
Of course I will reveal their names, but I'm looking for an appropriate platform. The Press Council, the South African National Editors Forum, I can give them the names. I mean, I've tracked these people since I was told about 6 years ago, and I was dismayed when 2 of them took very, very senior roles.
And Niran, he takes me right to the next question, which is a very uncomfortable one for me, because with our superficial debates, you get accused of hating on this one, trolling on this one. I've also, like Macintosh, seen some people who are journalists, who are editors, who I think no longer belongs in the sector. It doesn't mean that from a human connection point of view, we don't give people second chances. But when you see the impact of unverified information and accusation on people, when you see what damage the media does when it doesn't report the truth, should people be re-employed? Should they emerge in another newspaper publication? What do you think?
Look, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, if you look back at kind of the immediate history of South African journalism, there have been moments, especially, I suppose, in the Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma battle that grew up pre-Polokwane. There were a lot of journalists who were very obviously partisan on one side or the other.
But it's happening again
and
in the New Dawn.
And how do we keep that in check? Especially when some of those people get rehired again, and I mean, they're on better salaries, bigger jobs. I mean, I suppose that's the only.
I can see you're also uncomfortable about it. I can see you are, but look, I think it's an important question. I really think, because here we are now criticizing politicians for not taking action against their own. Instead, redeploy. This one emerges here, you get accused. Of course, there are different rules that govern our industry, but we really ought to reflect and have a conversation about why we're not doing it. And I think it also reflects the lack of training and investment in young journalists, because they should be coming through the ranks and be able to do that formidable investigative journalism.
Well, I suppose as South Africans, we are very, very forgiving. I mean, when you now talk about that period of Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki, I remember journalists that were being very, not just partisan. They actively victimized people. We ended up with commissions of inquiry.
We know all about it.
Where are they now?
Let's come back again when those names are revealed. But this is very important. South African media, you ought to reflect on your role. It is sacrosanct. Our democracy depends on a bold, authentic media that pursues the truth, no matter the consequences. We're not supposed to be fans of the people that we report on. We're not supposed to take sides and be partisan. We're supposed to report to the best of our ability and represent the person who doesn't have a voice. And you, society, be discerning, be demanding. Don't let the media and politicians dribble you. Thank you for watching Unfiltered tonight. I look forward to being with you again as we have more authentic, robust conversations. We'll see you again right here at 8:30 p.m. on SABC 3 and SABC channel 404.